I was trying to think of metaphors for guitar strings. For you skateboarding youth, wheels. For you graffiti kids, magic markers, or paint brushes, or zippers, or like stitching. I mean, it's what holds everything together. It's a thing that's absolutely essential. There's God, then there's his voice was Gabriel. You know what I mean? Like there has to be something to give vibration to actually make movement.
A lot of people take it for granted, but a string like a reed or a drum head, they kind of really drive the sound. The string is where the music starts. The sound starts with that vibrating string.
Strings used to be made from guts, intestines, and your family was involved in that business.
They were shepherds. In the wintertime, when they might have slaughtered some of the sheep, they would make strings from the intestines. Actually traced it back to 1680 in Sale, Italy.
330-something years of strings?
Yep.
Starting in the 1930s and continuing through the 40s and 50s, John D'Addario Sr. and John D'Angelico collaborated and developed the acoustic and electric round-wound string formulas that in time would become the baseline for the entire industry.
Round-wound strings were developed first on acoustic guitar strings. When electric guitars came along, they needed strings to be magnetic to pick up the sound. That became a challenge because the only strings that were magnetic at the time were flat-wound strings, or kind of essentially converted cello or violin or viola strings, and quite dead sounding. To get a really bright acoustic kind of sound out of a magnetic electric pickup, something else had to be developed. In the 30s, the Bethlehem Steel Company created a mill in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and they made round wire in the diameters that was necessary for making music strings, and he started experimenting with that, and it was absolutely the most perfect combination. It sounded awesome. And Nate Daniel, who started the Dan Electro Company, and he made electric guitars and basses, and he was challenging my dad as well. The bass string that he developed for Dan Electro was really unique, in multi-layers of round wire. When I was a kid, that's the only string I wanted to play. In the 50s, as rock and roll became more and more popular, Elvis Presley and the Beatles came along, a lot more electric guitars. Guys were looking for a way to make that guitar kind of cut through. When we play the guitar, we plug it with a pick. We want it to go.
In 1965, The Who released My Generation and everything changed. Bassist John Entwistle would buy Dan Electro guitars, which were strung with D'Addario's round-wound strings, then remove those strings and put them on his other instruments.
John Entwistle bought 3 Dan Electro basses because he liked the sound of those strings, and he recorded the My Generation album, and the solo in My Generation is played on those Dan Electro strings because he wanted that real bright piano brilliance. To me, particularly the bass playing was really new to me. I thought it was, like really bright, and whoever took a bass solo in a song before? I mean, I don't think anybody.
Everyone began to chase the sound that those strings gave. Guitarists and producers all over the world were searching for that round-wound sound. A sound that would give them the freedom to cut through, to push, to experiment.
I always would get the strings right from the factory floor. I would go in on Saturdays with my dad all the time. I was always intrigued with the string making process, and I always had these really bright sounding strings. Nobody else could get replacement strings except the guys in my band. Every other band that we would compete against to get the gigs at the time, we go, how do you get that really bright sound? What is that? Everyone was playing these pure nickel strings, and they were dead. They just didn't sound great. And at 13 or 14 years old, I didn't really know to tell my father, maybe you really should just put these out with your own name on them. People would buy them.
The time had come for D'Addario to create a company under his own name, and in 1973, a brand called D'Addario XL was born. D'Addario XL would ultimately become the world's largest selling electric guitar string.
Growing up in the 60s, there was such a cultural change, and people were experimenting with everything. Music, art, you name it. It was the same thing with strings. The culture is, to be very curious, to constantly be asking how do I make this better, or how do I make something different? We make 700,000 strings a day here.
700,000 strings.
Still something we live by today as a company and a family. And I think it had a lot to do with the period in which I grew up, the culture of the time, to experiment. And that's what we do, we experiment every day.